Because people in the green zone, people in a positive mood, they're 31% more productive, 37% more influential, and 300% more creative. And these are all absolutely essential for not just a good life, but also being a great contributor at work.
I'm Dr. Louise Messara, and this is the Future Health Podcast. In the last 20 years, the workforce participation rate of Australians over 65 has more than doubled to around 15% of the workforce. And the health workforce is ageing even faster. Whether by choice or by necessity, many of us are facing the reality of working far longer than we intended. And just when we thought the bell for the last lap was about to ring, looks like the coach is signalling there are still 3 laps to go. Today we talk to Graeme Cowan, a founding board member of Are You OK? And the host of the Caring CEO podcast, about some of the tools we need to help us navigate the marathon that is work and stay physically and holistically well from the start to the end of our careers, especially if the finish line is not as close as we first thought. Graeme Cowan has a leadership background in the corporate sector, and after a personal journey through severe depression, now speaks, writes and teaches about mentally healthy and safe teams in the workplace. Welcome, Graeme. The introduction really, I suppose, gives us a bit of a sneak peek as to why it might be that you're here talking to us about this topic today. But I wondered if we could start with you sharing a little bit more about your personal journey and how you've ended up in a career that's so focused on sort of wellness and wellness in the workplace.
Yeah, sure. I started off in sales and marketing. I worked with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. Then I moved to human resources, to recruitment, outplacement, and then culture change. I worked with a culture change organisation and did quite a bit of work with Ramsay Healthcare in that sort of capacity, so got some exposure to hospitals there. And then I moved back into management consulting, and in that role I was recruiting people in the new area of e-commerce. And there was a big setback in the market, and the market really collapsed from a recruitment perspective. And so did I. I crashed and burned. And even though I'd had episodes of depression before, this was really tough, really long. I was actually out of work for 5 years.
Okay.
I lost my job, my marriage broke down, and had to go and live with my parents. And I really wouldn't have survived without them. They believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And it was a slow path back, and I decided then to write my first book, Back from the Brink, because I really yearned for stories of people who'd been where I'd been and come back. And it was a really lovely process to go through that. And it also gave me a real sense of purpose. And then my books came out, and through my books, I met Gavin Larkin. And Gavin was the founder of Are You OK? Yeah. And when I heard about it, it just really resonated because I knew how critical my parents were to my recovery. And so my book came out, and we had some high-profile people in the book, and that led to lots of coverage. It was launched at the Black Dog Institute, and in probably about 2 weeks, I had about close to 100 interviews on TV, radio, newspapers. Yeah, it was. And that did lead to it becoming a bestseller. And after that, and also my work with Are You OK?, I decided to do an international book. And in that book, I surveyed over 4,000 people to find out what worked best in their recovery. And because I worked in the corporate area, I was very keen to go back into the workplace and really help leaders to create the right teams that really promoted health and well-being, because we can do our stuff individually, but it's so much more powerful if you're part of a team that really promotes that self-care and personal resilience, and that ultimately leads to team care and team resilience.
Okay, so if we sort of start in the workplace, how do we know if we're working somewhere that's sort of a fit and healthy workplace?
You can feel the vibe. You know, you can walk into a workplace and it's all silent and serious, or you can walk into one where there's people smiling and interacting and carrying on. And it is in that sort of scenario where people are at their best. In my keynotes and workshops, I often ask people to reflect on the best team they've been part of It could be their current team or a previous employer or working at McDonald's or being part of a sports team. And I asked people to nominate what are the key elements of those really great teams. And they've got about 10 options, but in 95% of the cases, the top 3 things nominated are that we enjoyed ourselves, we had each other's back, and we cared about each other. So that's the basic unit or nucleus of great teams.
And if we think about things at a personal level, you mentioned the idea of having purpose, and I think, that can be critical to people's resilience in the workplace. But if we think about personal fitness to work and personal fitness to contribute, are there different sorts of measures or different categories that we should be thinking about when it's us rather than us as part of a team?
Yeah, I talk about the mantra, self-care isn't selfish.
Self-care isn't selfish.
Isn't selfish.
Okay.
And we need to take care of ourselves. And there's really 3 areas or outcomes we're seeking. Vitality, that's our physical health. Intimacy, which is our emotional health. And prosperity, and that's our contribution health. Mm. And so in that vitality, there's, exercise, good sleep, good nutrition. In the intimacy, it's really having good relationships where we see people consistently, we enjoy the interaction, but also we can be vulnerable with each other and, just talk frankly about things that we may not be coping with. And the prosperity is our contribution health. And that can come, like for people working in the healthcare sector, there's a natural purpose about that, helping people to get better. But some people don't have that in the workplace, but they can have it if they, volunteer for a charity or a school or a sports team. And but those 3 things are really paramount. And if you think about that acronym, vitality, intimacy, prosperity, it's VIP. And my message is to people, we have to act like a VIP. And that means topping up each day our vitality glass of wellbeing, our intimacy glass, and our prosperity glass. Because we need all 3. We can't be great in one area and poor in somewhere else.
We're talking a lot at the moment in health about the longevity of health careers. So when we think of ourselves as the VIP, are there any particular tactics you'd suggest when we're really talking about a working life which is now maybe so much longer than it used to be? How do we keep up that vitality? How do we keep up the intimacy in that sort of environment?
Well, it is really planning your week, and it's something that I do and encourage people to do at least once a week, and I do it on Sunday. And so I think about this week, when have I got my exercise, when have I got my good sleep, when am I doing my meditation. Likewise, with people in the intimacy category, it's thinking about, this week, am I seeing people that are good for me? And people that are good for me, we feel better being around them. They help us feel good about ourselves. And if we haven't got those people planned in the week ahead, it's making sure that we're making appointments, so sending a text or an email and organising to catch up with people.
So these small actions, they all sort of build up, and you feel like it feels sometimes like they're so incremental, but these are the steps we need to all take.
They're small incremental steps, but if they're done consistently, they become really, really powerful. Like people often talk about, wanting to exercise more and making time to do that. But if we do that, it's so much better for not just our personal health, but how we present as an individual. Because people in the green zone, people in a positive mood, they're 31% more productive, 37% more influential, and 300% more creative. And these are all absolutely essential for not just a good life, but also being a great contributor at work, because we're more productive, more influential, more creative. That helps us up. That sets us up for
100%. I think we all know, good exercise. We know some of these things. And I think the biggest struggle often is moving from the knowing to the doing. Mm. Have you got any top tips that are going to motivate me from knowing I should go for a walk or a jog to actually going for my walk or my jog?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is deciding when and where you're going to do that.
Okay.
And people that do make that decision, when and where they're going to do it, it increases the chance of doing it by 300%, according to Peter Goldwitzer, a specialist in intention to action. So just that decision is really, really important. The second thing is to start small. Don't think you're going to run a marathon straight off. Keep it small to start with, just a 20-minute walk. But if it's done consistently, that then makes it easier in the next week to do 25 minutes, 30, and take it up to 45. So it is little incremental things that are done on a regular basis. And likewise, getting together with people that are good for you. And it's also deciding with work as well. Work falls in the prosperity things. If I think about one thing I could do this week that would make the biggest impact, what is that? And making sure that you also schedule that in your diary as well. Because, you think through that when and where, it really increases the likelihood it's going to happen.
Okay, so you and I can do that. What if I'm starting from a place of burnout and I go back to your personal journey? When you start from a base that's maybe, in a difficult place. And I think for a lot of staff, a lot of workforce in health, on the back of COVID and general work pressures, there's a lot of stress, pressure, burnout, exhaustion. Where do we help those people to start their journey?
Well, it really was part of my recovery was, coming across this, formula, if you like, of things to do. And it was, when you're in a bad place, a dark place, you think it's going to last forever. And so I think one of the really critical things is to just really think 1 week out, and think about, when am I going to do these, categories of things, the vitality, the intimacy, prosperity, in a way that's going to help me. But it's also not about, going over the top. It's about starting small and being consistent. And I think one of the biggest things is not thinking too far ahead, not trying to sort out your whole life when you're not in a great place. Because it's not a good time to think about it. Just think 1 week ahead, but know that you have thought about the things that are going to happen in the next week, which are mood boosters. And the things that I talk about, they are mood boosters rather than mood vampires.
Okay. We've been focusing at the moment on the week ahead, and I really take that point. But if we think a little bit more broadly and a little bit more into the future, we have a workforce that's constantly in flux and change. We're being told to constantly innovate. And I'm just wondering if you've been thinking about any particular features of the sort of future of work that might mean we need to be fit or well in a slightly different way.
Yeah, well, the fitness and well-being of us is obviously critical to working now and in the future. One of the good things is that we are living much longer than we did, say 20 or 30 years ago. And it's also, for many people, work is a really positive part of their life. There's evidence which tells us the younger we retire, the younger we die. And so people that do stay at work, especially if it's rewarding work with purpose, that can extend your life. It can extend the sense of interest you have about it. But we must have a learning mindset. I once heard, I think it was the chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, talking about what were the things that made a great fit at Google. And one of the things, you had to be passionate. It didn't matter what it was, but you had to be passionate about something. And then you had to be a learning machine. And that's just keeping our curiosity. And deciding to be a learning machine isn't about making massive changes, but it's taking a spirit of curiosity to, everything you do. We also have to have a experimenting mindset. Some people think about it like leading like a scientist. And what that means is that, we know something's got to change. We haven't got 100% of the information, but we'll try something. We'll do an experiment, see what works, what doesn't. And this is a critical part about being future ready. It's having psychological safety around us. This is where people can be their authentic self. It doesn't matter whether you're 20 or 80. You feel you can be part of your authentic self. You feel you can try small things that will better serve your clients or patients, or better serve your colleagues. And if it doesn't work out, we quickly regather and say, what can we learn from this to reboot? And it is this, learning, experimentation, redoing, which is going to lead to an evolution, which is going to be better for everyone.
So I know you read a lot, you talk a lot, you meet with a lot of different organisations and businesses. What are Australian workers telling you that they want from their employers in terms of sort of being able to thrive in the workplace?
Yeah, well, there's probably three things. There's some recent research that came out from Reward Gateway. And number one thing was rewarding work, work that you personally found inspiring. And hopefully there's many people.
Rewarding work. I thought you meant rewarding remuneration for work. So, okay.
Rewarding and meaningful work.
Yeah.
Meaningful work may be a better way to put it.
Yeah.
The second thing is a good manager. And managers are the real linchpins in any organisation because they're the ones that are managing the people that are often at the coalface. So making sure managers have the right mindset, making sure and encouraging them to be fit as well, because if they're not in good mood themselves, it's very hard to build team mood around that. And the third element, which we all crave, is reward and recognition. And this isn't talking about, employee of the year. It's just getting little rewards each day that can really make a difference. Acknowledgement that you're making progress. Therese Umberley is a professor at Harvard, and she has a book called The Progress Principle. And she decoded, the day of workers, thousands of workers over a period of time. And the one thing which was most motivating for people was knowing they were making progress on meaningful work. And that could be just, a little problem solved or a significant one. But having a mindset where we do think about reward and recognition is what we all yearn now and in the future.
We read in Health a lot about sort of scaremongering around the impact of AI and technology in sort of de-peopling aspects of what we do. So, we hear about armies of robot doctors coming and all of these sorts of things. Are you thinking about the impending impact of technology and AI on the workplace across the board? And do you think that will change those top three factors?
I don't think it'll change the top three. We really yearn to be doing meaningful work, have a good boss, and get reward and recognition. But it's going to have profound effect, AI. The rate of change is just extraordinary. And I think everyone has to be on board and try it. Try to use it each day, from little things like, I want to make a vegan salad and I've got cauliflower, tomatoes and carrots. Give me a recipe. And it will produce a recipe. But likewise, to understand the capacity and the advantage of this in a workplace, it's brilliant for saying, I've written a 1,000-word article here, condense it to 100 words. It's just brilliant at that. But it's also just progressing so fast. And I think that what we all have to do is to be involved with it, to work out what is the upside. It's certainly not foolproof, and there's been many examples where that hasn't been the case, but it is changing incredibly quickly. I've seen a guy who got AI to write a video script, who then uploaded a video of him talking and 2 photographs, pressed a button, and it looked like him talking, a 3D image of him talking. And he showed something that he did 3 months ago, and it was profoundly improved. And this
Even
is the AV side of things and the video side of things. So there's if we don't embrace it, we will fall behind.
Yeah, I think there are chances to, particularly, I think about the nurses' working day and the amount of time that they spend doing activities that perhaps could be done by technology, but to free them up to be people-facing and to be back doing the meaningful work, the caring work that you say is so highly rated amongst employees. So I do think there's we sort of probably need a better language around the parts of our jobs, each of us, that we sort of be prepared to sacrifice to technology if it meant we were buying back some meaning in our day.
Exactly.
And that might be a real opportunity for
I
technology
really
and AI. Yeah. I mentioned in the introduction that the workforce in general is getting older and health just seems to be older again. But are you thinking about any adjustments that sort of society as a whole needs to make when we're thinking about a workforce that now is really going from sort of 16, 17 up until the 80s? As a society, do we need to be thinking about anything differently?
Yeah, like 100%. Like there is serious ageism in place in interviews. I guess it sounds like not so much in the healthcare sector, but if you go to, a big bank or an insurance company, and I speak in these places really regularly, it's very, very unusual to see anyone above 50. And this is a huge loss to, the economy, to all those around us. So I think reducing ageism and looking at capability, I think is a really, really important component. It's also taking into account is, how the older workforce could benefit from the younger workforce and vice versa. Like I've spoken with people that are hiring lots of graduates and they're hiring them to be case managers to look after people. And they don't have good verbal skills because, they've been through COVID, so there was huge isolation there. They were communicating primarily by text message. And a lot of these younger people need help on how to have a conversation on the phone because they're not really used to doing that.
I mean, that's interesting because I think communication in teams is critical, and I think I think you share that view. But we are probably talking about generations of people who, in some ways, speak a different language. Before we're helping our younger colleagues speak to the outside world, how can we work together within our own team to sort of find that common ground of communication?
Yeah, remember I shared before that people, when they think about their best teams, we enjoy working together, we had each other's back and we cared about each other. And so it's really creating ways to connect and understand each other. Like one of the really fantastic ways of doing that I've seen is that, at the weekly meeting, one person interviews another person for 15 minutes. And it could be one of the really good things to talk about is what have been your career highlights, your hardships, and who are your heroes. And it is an interview, so one person just asks questions and probes for 15 minutes. And people will learn so much about that person that they didn't know before. Likewise, next week, it's a different interview and a different person. So it's an incredible way to, increase that connection, understanding, and finding out what people are passionate about, what really interests them. There was a great example of that in the football world. Richmond, I think it was in 2016, they came 13th in the comp, and they adopted this hero, hardships, and highlights, where every person spoke about that out of the 45 people. And the level of trust that built up, like some of the players were having to explain, for example, that they grew up in housing commission homes. And it was a hardship, feeling embarrassed to invite people to come home. So this level of disclosure and candor just built really high trust and led to them winning the premiership in a year. Likewise in the workplace, if we have better understanding of people, what are the things we're passionate about? What are the things that have been really difficult for us? It just creates connections, and those connections are critical for belonging. Yeah. And as humans, as workers, we all desire a sense of longing.
We spend so much of our lifetime in our work environment. What level of responsibility do you think the employer carries for our personal wellness, or creating that sort of safe space for us in the 40, 50, 60, 70 hours we're spending in the workplace?
I mean, a very, very important role. And, one of the amazing things to me is that there's, new legislation in place already that talks about psychological health being just as important as physical health and well-being. And I think it's absolutely critical that organisations have their finger on the pulse, and not with a once-a-year survey, which then takes 6 months before it's rolled out and talked about, but instant ways of monitoring the health, the motivation and well-being of people in the organisation. And those possibilities exist now, where we can keep that in mind, because the biggest loss of productivity is due to mood disorders, depression, anxiety, substance abuse problems, and bipolar. And so keeping a tabs on that, and more importantly, understanding the root cause of those problems. Is it because there's too much work or too little work? Is it because there's bullying happening in our team? Is it because we do change really poorly, no one knows what's going on? So it's not just a matter of knowing where they are in the moodometer, but what's the root cause behind that, which, you know what to address.
I mean, some people, I think when we're thinking about this, the older workforce, a proportion of people are staying in the workforce for economic reasons. I think in order to, we have a shortage of workforce, so we sort of need to encourage people. And I think I've been thinking a bit about the aspects of health or working in the health sector that can offer more than economic reward, because we're a little hamstrung, where we work under awards. It's not quite the same as the private sector necessarily. And so I've been thinking, as an employer of hundreds of thousands of people, what are the specific ways in which we might become a preferred employer because of more than the economic reward that we offer? You talked before a little bit about, the work that we do being privileged work. It's privileged work to help people in these critical times in their lives, and that does bring its own reward. But are there any other areas that you think a sector like health could really take a front foot and create that different reward structure for people? Big question.
Yeah, and I'm going to use an example which might not sound like it's relevant to health, and that's Bunnings, that have their warehouses. But the thing they have in common is you have to be on the floor, or many people have to be on the floor. You can't do it remotely. And so one of the things that Bunnings has done has made it really friendly to older workers. Their oldest worker is 92 years old.
Congratulations, Bunnings. That's impressive, yeah.
But he's there because he loves it. He loves helping people. But likewise, they've also put in place some systemic things that really make a difference. So, if you're a husband and wife, or partners, and you have skills in Bunnings in Sydney, you can go on the road as a grey nomad. You can work in Alice Springs for 3 months and earn money while you're there. Now, Alice Springs gets workers from Bunnings who are trained already, who can get up to scratch really quickly, and then they go to Cairns and do it there. And so with New South Wales Health and other places, maybe there's a chance to do something similar. You've got all the credentials, you've got the training, the systems, but you might, go to remote areas where you can be utilised in that area. So it's an open mind and learning from outside, not just being too myopic.
I want to talk a little bit more about the communication issues when we have different generations working together. Some recent report out of Melbourne University has suggested that more than 40% of conduct complaints, so sort of disruptive behaviour, bullying, harassment, are linked to the older portion of, in this case, medical practitioners. I totally take your point that there is so much to learn and harness from the older working population. But we need to be able to bring the older group along with the current culture of any institution. Do you see that as something we can tackle, and have you seen it in other areas?
I think it is really, again, keeping our finger on the pulse. You read out statistics about, 40% of issues are with older workers. Well, they're probably still relating to how they started. It might not have evolved too much. But the beauty about having real feedback is that you can identify where that happens. If someone's being dismissive or shutting down ideas or being really hierarchical, we need to know about that, and we need to do something about it to build and create that psychological safety. So yeah, real-time data really helps with that. And I'm sure most of those 40% don't go to work thinking I'm going to make someone else miserable. And they don't often realise the impact that's having. But if you can see that there are issues in this team compared to other places in the hospital, that's got to be acted on.
Medicine and nursing, quite hierarchical in structure. And look, we've come great strides in making the environment somewhere where young people or any people can call out disruptive behaviour or behaviour that's unaligned with our values. But when you're looking around for how to be in a workplace, you tend to look at the people ahead of you. When they aren't showing you the right way, where do we go next as a young group of employees?
You mentioned before we came on air about going across organisations and accessing, people that were at your level in another division or another area. And I think this is a really big area of potential because, if there's someone high performing in another area, they're probably in a pretty good situation to give you feedback for your level of seniority. And it's not just really good for, personal development and accessing other skills in other areas, but it's also been shown to be a real foundation to innovation as well. The very best innovators are people that can move across different areas in a hospital or a hierarchy and understand what's realistic, what can we realistically do if it's something that has to be applied across the whole organisation. So, celebrating those that are really good at doing the role you're at the moment, learning from those and giving examples, tangible examples, are a really good way of progress and making a difference.
I mean, we are lucky in health that we don't have specific retirement ages, and we do have a lot of amazing mentors for young clinicians coming through. I read a recent report out of the College of Surgeons which suggested that 17.5% of active surgeons are actually over 65, which I was surprised to hear. An extraordinary body of knowledge, and I think we haven't been excellent at finding ways outside of continuing in your clinical practice to really harness that expertise and sort of opportunity for mentoring. I take your point that sometimes we need to look outside and look at other programs, perhaps in other sorts of organisations that have done better with taking people out of particularly active positions, but maintaining that expertise and excellence. Graeme, do you find any resistance when you're talking to 50-plus-year-olds like you and I to some of the language that you use and some of the discussion around safety in the workplace? I think the younger generations, they're onto this, they're onto their own personal wellness, they're listening to the podcasts, they're reading the books. Do you find that there's any resistance for the older age group, and how do you overcome that?
I think there is resistance, because it's worked for them, it's how they got ahead, it's how I did it, and I did fine. But what's the real evidence is some of this real-time feedback. If this is leading to people feeling like they're not being heard, everyone has to recognise that. Teams have to recognise that and see what can we do differently about that. So it's this real-time feedback on how supported people are, how safe they are, that will lead to change. If they don't get that feedback, what's the reason for changing? You only change if it's more painful not to change.
And we seem to be very compelled by evidence in health. So it sounds like there's plenty of good evidence that having these safe working environments, working teams leads to increased productivity, increased creativity, as you were saying at the start. So it sounds like this isn't just us talking. This is really backed by evidence. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much so. And the world leader in this area is Professor Amy Edmondson from Harvard, psychological safety. And I interviewed her on my podcast, The Caring CEO. And one of the things I always ask at the end of my podcast is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And what she said, well, I've been stressed quite a few times in my life. I've over-worried. And I wish I'd asked myself, what can I learn to address this? What can I learn to sort this out? Rather than going stressed, what can I learn to sort it out? And I love that as a tip.
One of the interesting frustrations I think that comes about in an intergenerational workplace is this sort of different sense of values around things like flexibility. Look, a lot of people during and after COVID have really done a reset in life and are really thinking about their work-life balance and other aspects of what their new priority system might be. But outside of COVID, we know that the younger workers already come to work with just a different sort of relationship to the workplace, a different approach to how they're going to be prepared to offer their services and work. And I know for older generations, this can be quite confronting. Gen Xers and the baby boomers, quite different in their loyalty to employer, and I use that term maybe in terms of time rather than passion. Have you seen this across the board, and do you think that's one of the essential different ingredients we're going to have to try and deal with?
Yeah, there just has been profound changes in terms of people work and how they work. And in some industries like health, for some people, it's a lot more restrictive. You've got to physically be there. But, in terms of engagement, the best decisions are made when teams decide how and when they're going to work. Where you're going to work and how you're going to work. And I think that is a very important dynamic where we want to have really good conversations. There's a very interesting study that happened in Google where they wanted to understand what were the core ingredients or the norms to their best teams. And they looked at 180 teams around the world, looked at 250 in each of those teams, and they identified that there's 5 things or 5 team norms identified really high-performing teams. And the first was psychological safety, and I'll come back to that. The second is clarity around expectations, dependability. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. Purpose, believing in what you're doing, and meaning, feeling that what I'm doing, what our team's doing is contributing to that purpose. But by far the most important was this psychological safety, because if you didn't have that, you couldn't have robust discussions about dependability or clarity. And having those robust discussions is really, really important to work out what's going to be the best option. There is no one manager or boss that has divine wisdom to decide the best way to work. And it is by having others involved. It doesn't mean it's a democracy, but it does mean we hear thoughts of everyone about what might work best for them, but also collectively for the team.
I mean, I think there is a real reset for us in health to just think about redesign of some of our roles and responsibilities. We talk a lot about moving away from sort of job descriptions to skills. And when you take out sort of the role and you sit in a place where we're focused on people's skills, then elements of the older workforce really come to the fore in certain areas, but they really may not be able to do an element of the role. And so perhaps we just really need to be considering a more flexible approach in order to keep engaged our older workforce.
And it's not just skills either. I really believe it's very much in everyone understanding their strengths. If we do understand our strengths and use our strengths each day, we're 600% more likely to be engaged in our work and 300% more likely to report high life satisfaction, according to Gallup. And so strengths is a fantastic insight to have as well, because you can see a title here, a new title here, but we don't really know unless we ask ourselves, will this role allow me to use my strengths?
Just to finish up, Graeme, are there any other reflections in general that you think you've seen in the sort of the Australian workplace that you feel like we really could reflect on more deeply in health and think about applying to creating an environment of enhanced wellness for our workers?
I think every team in health could ask themselves regularly, do we feel connected? Do we feel connected with each other? Can we be ourselves, our authentic selves? Do we feel that we belong? So the outcome from that is that we belong. The second question is do we feel safe? And this is around psychological safety. Are we able to try things? I'm not talking about things that could affect physical health, but interpersonal things. Do we feel safe to challenge people interpersonally? And, we want really from that a feeling that we have each other's back. And then the third element is, do we share a future? And so really thinking about, are the people in our team contributing to the future of where we're heading? And that doesn't matter whether you're 70 years old or 20 years old. Do we feel involved and part of that? It is, it is a brave new world, but it's also very exciting. I think there are wonderful opportunities if we do take steps to stay on top of our well-being and our mood, but also what we're learning and how we're evolving.
Graeme, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.